Please welcome Managing Partner, Savannah Fund, Mbwana Alliy, Founder and CEO, Agora, Elsa Sze, and Deborah Berebichez.
Thanks, everyone, for being here again. We have, continuing with the theme of harnessing talent and ingenuity everywhere to solve global challenges. We have two people here with fascinating stories about taking capital and technology and using it to spread good work and improving the world in areas where it's most needed. I'm going to start with Elsa Sze, and she's the founder of Agora, which she'll explain. It's a platform, pretty cool. I actually had a chance to look at it last night. So besides explaining what the platform does, Elsa, I'd like to hear also what your motivation for starting it was.
Yeah. So my name is Elsa. I'm the founder of Agora. It's an idea-sharing platform for teams and communities to put the best ideas into action. I was part of the Obama campaign in 2012, and I love being able to go out to the States, knocking on doors and talking to people. And on election day, I met a woman. She was very old, and she lived tied to an oxygen tank at home, and I took her in my car to go to a polling place. And then halfway through the drive, which is really a 5-minute drive, her oxygen tank just stopped working. So I just panicked, and like, oh my gosh, like, what am I gonna do? And Rochelle looked me in the eyes and she said, "You take me to vote and then the hospital." And I listened to her. I took her to the polling place. There was a nurse who just voted, so she came outside and she's like, "Oh yeah, you didn't know how to, turn this on." She fixed it, and Rochelle was fine. But at that moment, I realized, wait, why did she risk her life just to go vote on that day? It wasn't just that civic duty that she has. I was born and raised in Hong Kong, and I grew up knowing that it's not a right, it's a privilege that you get to decide who your leaders are, but also influence in your community. But I also realized the reason why she had to risk her life to go vote on that day was because that was the only day that she mattered. Election day was the only day that she actually had a voice. And that was a moment where I realized, wait a minute, we live in a democracy, and yet the strength of our democracy isn't just determined by this very one day or the election day that we have once in a while. The true strength of our democracy depends on our ability as a community to problem solve, crowdsource ideas, and turn them into action to solve problems. And so when I was at the Harvard doing my MBA and my policy degree, I realized that perhaps technology isn't just enabling us to chat more on social media, but actually crowdsource ideas and make them into action. And that's why I founded Agora, that helps communities, foundations, nonprofits, companies to do better innovation, to crowdsource ideas from each other. Because by having more voices in the room, having diversity and inclusion, we come up with better answers for ourselves. And technology can lower the barrier for that kind of conversation to happen.
What a wonderful way of answering my question. Definitely, we need more voices everywhere. That brings me to Mbwana's story. I think you have like 6 lives into one. You've been in aerospace, you've been a VC in the Silicon Valley. We both studied at Stanford. You're a photographer, and you are the founder of the Savannah Fund in East Africa that helps funnel money to ventures there. Now, obviously it's a part of the world that does not have the infrastructure and the resources that other parts of the world have. And in the developing world, what would you say, Mbwana, are the benefits of doing your work besides the return of investment?
Thanks. I would say that a lot of new vehicles have been set up, or new types of funding have been set up, like crowdfunding, et cetera, all across the world. But actually, old-style venture capital is still needed in emerging markets, because actually a lot of heavy lifting that needs to happen on the ground is actually still crucial. So I'll give you some examples. Like, I mean, almost every day I get pinged by some venture in the US or Europe, or some venture capitalist in the US or Europe asking for connections in Africa, right? Oh, we're building a drone company and we need regulatory approval. Do you know anything about that? And I say this because often you have impact investors investing from the US, from Europe. You have traditional VCs from the West also coming into Africa, but opportunistically, they'll do one deal every 20 or 30 recently. And there's still a role for traditional venture capitalists to be on the ground and spending the time to network and connect startups to markets and helping with talent. So I moved back 5 years ago. So it's both my 5-year anniversary of being back to Africa and my 10-year Stanford anniversary of business school. So I just came from that. But it's remarkable how much I was able to achieve in connecting up, from Kenya to Tanzania to South Africa to Madagascar to Angola even, right? Just by spending the time, being African and going back and investing the time to really connect with the stakeholders. And also explaining what venture capital means. Right? So if you come as a Western startup or Asian startup or wherever, you come to Africa and you're trying to solve a problem, the credibility is very low from the local community because they're just like, okay, there's another foreigner coming in. But if you say you have a local investor with you, it takes you a lot further quicker. And you also get faster insights from customers. So I don't live in the city. I don't live in Nairobi. I used to live in Nairobi for 3 years, but I moved to Arusha, Tanzania. And there, I can actually see the real Africa more and more, right? So I see the rural challenges people have, connectivity. I see the ag solutions that people are coming up with or problems they face. It's too easy to be in the cities in Africa and feel like you're like in Cambridge or New York. It's actually getting like that in some parts of Africa. That nice. And then a lot of the same investors from the West, they only spend time in those markets when they come. So I always say like you have to come visit me in Arusha. You can't expect just to come meet you at your hotel in Nairobi to talk about Africa problems that are not related to where we're actually sitting.
Sure.
It's actually very hard for me to explain problems in Africa in a Western environment or a developed environment. Yeah.
That is super interesting. When I looked you up on LinkedIn, I think somebody gave you a review saying Mbwana is the man. He's quite the connector. And I think very much what you're saying is needed, somebody to bridge the Western world and bring capital to these areas. And I see two areas growing specifically in East Africa, financial technology and education technology, because you're making people able to do credit, loans, etc., through mobile phones, and it's non-traditional education. What's exciting about these two areas?
It's a good question. Actually, to start a venture capital fund is very hard anyway. And to start an Africa-focused venture capital fund from the US, because I was Silicon Valley before, to go back is really tough. So I pitched 200 times before I got my first yes from Tim Draper, and a bunch of others then followed on. But actually, the major reason people were banking on our fund was the emergence of fintech in Africa, in particularly mobile money. So M-Pesa in Kenya and growing across East Africa was probably the key reason why investors were willing to take a bet on a VC firm that was going to tap into this wave. And a lot of fintech startups were starting to emerge from this platform. So I'm sure everyone knows M-Pesa, but now they're like powering, they're about a third of the GDP of Kenya. About $3 billion a month flows through it. It's like the national banking switch. Just for context, 10 years ago, before M-Pesa, there were 2 million bank accounts. Now there are about 20 million mobile money accounts. And so this has become the financial, nerve center for not only Kenya, but it's spread across East Africa now. So it's not just M-Pesa, it's mobile. It's Tigo Pesa, Airtel Money, Tigo Cash in some countries, EcoCash in Zimbabwe. So it's growing, and it's the financial inclusion aspect is very powerful because you unlock so much. Without a financial services base, you can't do anything else. So let's take a look at e-commerce, right? Of course, as a VC, I'm trying to look for the Alibaba of Africa, right? That's not going to happen if you don't have good payment infrastructure. So of course, M-Pesa is a great layer, but then there are other emerging payment networks. So for example, one of my favorite investments recently was a Bitcoin startup in Zimbabwe, which I loved because Zimbabwe has no national currency anymore. If you know Zimbabwe has record inflation, the Zim dollar is absolutely worthless. You have $1 trillion Zim dollar notes. They use 11 different currencies. I think they added a 12th Chinese yuan recently. And so you can buy a coffee with a $10 bill and and they're legally allowed to give you change in dollars, euros, rand. And they often do this. So where else should you introduce Bitcoin than a country that has no national currency using so many currencies? And actually it's doing pretty well in that one of the main use cases is for people to import cars from Japan. So a Japanese car importer, B Ford, is allowing customers in Zimbabwe to pay for cars with Bitcoin because of currency issues and capital controls in Zimbabwe. And so yeah, fintech is exciting. There's also microinsurance. which is for farmers it's growing. You're also seeing a lot of work recently in identity. So our last investment in fintech is actually identity. It's hard to spread lending and insurance if you haven't got identity. So in Tanzania, where I'm from, I have a passport and a driver's license, but if you don't vote, if you don't drive, if you don't travel outside Tanzania, you don't have any ID. Yeah. There's no national ID. And that's really a foundation for any financial services.
Of course.
Right, so a lot of the exciting fintech companies in Kenya, like Branch or Tala, that are doing mobile lending over mobile money, are working also because of identity in Kenya that's strong. But once they come to Tanzania, the scaling, guess who they call? They go, oh, Mbwana, we need your help in Tanzania because there's no ID. And so actually we end up investing in a startup that's doing identity in Tanzania, actually using facial recognition, same technology that Facebook uses, but now applying across the next, I guess, billion emerging market users who necessarily don't have ID and documentation.
This is so cool. Your energy is so contagious. It makes me want to find out about all these companies. Elsa, I want to shift to you. So being a minority, we talk all the time about women not getting investment. You were able to find investments for Agora. What would you say investors can do to be friendlier to minorities?
Yeah, this is a really hot topic. But I would start with a slightly different story first. When I was doing my research on how do people make decisions, most of us know what town halls are, right? So in our town or city, there are meetings, and people show up at 4 p.m. on a Tuesday, and so if you don't have 2 kids or 3 jobs, or you have a car, you are connected, you get to be a part of it. And so I realized that usually people who don't even speak English very well in the U.S., or they're immigrants, or they live far away, they will never be a part of that voice in the room. And so that is the motivation for Agora, which is we want to bring a voice to people who don't have any. And so when I started as an entrepreneur, I realized I'm usually the one who's not in the room when it comes to meeting with the people in the upper echelon of the investment world. And so how do I break down the door and be part of it? It's, to me, it's just about constantly showing up and breaking down stereotypes. I'll tell you one story. I was pitching to a panel of judges and investors a while ago, and me and one of the people from my team, he's a tall white guy, former football player, and so we showed up at the door. And the assistant, she was running the schedule, and she came up to us and she looked at him the entire time and said, all right, this is how it's going to run down. You're going to go in, blah, blah. She assumed he was the CEO. And we walked in the room. I didn't say anything. And Matt looked at me like, what is going on? So we went in the room. The assistant, she sat down, and the judges were there. And Matt sat down. I just stood up. I started pitching. And I saw her jaw dropped at the back. It's like, oh, I thought she was the assistant or the marketing person. So to me, it's all about just being there, doing double as good, like just be there, always breaking down that barrier. And even yesterday at this conference, someone from my team was talking to another person in this conference about Agora. And he was like, oh, I would love to meet your CEO. I think, connect me with him. And then my team member was like, oh, it's a she. So I think these little moments, because I think there's a bigger war to be fought in gender and inequality. There's also the smaller battles. And I would encourage anyone who is a woman, who's a minority, who wants to be a part of creating something great, because there's nothing better than being able to create something from nothing, but also bring the perspective, because I sympathize and empathize with those people who are not in the room in those meetings. And I want to be that person to bring that voice, but I have to do that myself first. Being able to raise money was something that I really love being able to do, and the way I kind of shifted my mindset, and this is something could be generalized to sometimes female entrepreneurs or women in general. You've heard the statistics that women have to be asked like 6.7 times to run for office, men like -1. So that is true in entrepreneurship too. And when I first had the idea of Agora, guess what? I wrote it down on my paper, my thesis. I put it away. And I'm like, someone's got to be doing this. Why is it going to be me? I don't think I'm the one doing it. And so before I even have an MVP, which is a minimum viable product, I actually have to get to an MVA, minimum viable agency, a sense of agency that I can actually make it happen. So I think the barrier for us is there's psychological, there's societal and cultural. And once you get over it and just say, you know what, I don't care, I'm going to try something and make it happen, And then, I got a lot of no's. I probably got 200 no's too, right? You go to people and they don't like what you have, but it's okay. Because sometimes the future is only visible to the eye of the entrepreneur. And not everyone can see it. If they all can see it, it's already happened. So I think having that conviction about what you do, and eventually people believe in your vision, and that's how you do it.
I had similar experiences, by the way, being a quantitative woman and having the experience of people thinking I'm the marketing person or whatnot.
Yes.
I want to bring us, you two are super charismatic, and I think that is probably part of what attracts investors and people to connect with you. And what advice would you give to others trying to get funding or connect capital to remote areas or the developing world? Whoever wants to answer.
I would say, for me, the journey actually was just being that bridge, right? Understanding multiple cultures and multiple sides of business or the communities is really, really important. And always trying to be at the intersect of that. So I became useful when I decided to bridge Silicon Valley with Africa. Even when I didn't have the Africa side figured out, because I'd been away for almost 20 years of my life. But in 5 years, I've been able to build up that network so much that then the capital starts. So I think that's a really, really important, just kind of be in the intersection of two different worlds. It's very hard to find someone who can do both, but if you can invest that time, it's really, really important. And then I guess the other thing is, there are so many different capital sources now. Obviously, old-style venture capital is what I'm for, because I think it's necessary in emerging markets. But maybe AngelList and there's other platforms. There's even in Africa, there's VC for Africa. There's a bunch of platforms now that even get you a lot of mileage in early-stage funding. Grants are still very important, even though in Africa it can be challenging in that it can actually conflict or crowd out private sector investment, or it can just cause bad. For example, I'm on a board of an animation studio in Tanzania that started off as a for-profit, making it's a Pixar it's a Pixar meets Sesame Street for Africa. And they started as a for-profit model, but it wasn't ready. They weren't able to commercialize. There weren't any advertisers. The corporates weren't really sponsoring it very well. So they switched to a nonprofit model where they're able to leverage much more grants. But they'll probably move back to commercial when the market's ready. So being able to understand how different capital sources can help you in different stages is really, really important. From crowdfunding to grants to venture capital. I think that's really, really important.
Awesome.
So to me, someone uses an analogy to me when I was in business school. In business school, you study cases and you read about great companies. It's the same as watching a YouTube video about how to swim. You don't know how to swim by watching the YouTube video. You have to jump in, drown a little bit, swim a little bit, and drown again, and then try not to die. I think that's how you get good at anything. Starting a company, pitching to people, just do it. Because the only way to learn is by putting yourself in that water and overcoming that fear that you might drown. I mean, you might. But if you don't try, you never get there. So same thing to me, that I had to jump in that water and do it. And I think that sometimes our education system is really good at telling us how to get from point A to point B, right? You put something on Google Maps, I'm gonna get there. There are 5 ways to get there, but it's, someone tell you what point B is. I think live entrepreneurship is very similar. It doesn't tell you where you're going. You have to find your own path. So making your own path is different from finding your own way to a point that someone already told you. Yeah. And I think that fear is what's holding us back from finding that mission. But once you find it, you know what a direction is. I still don't know where it is sometimes. I feel like I'm in a kind of a path and it leads me somewhere, but I know that direction. And once you see that light, I think you are authentic to yourself. And then people start believing you and following you. And I think that is how you can create that kind of authenticity and mission that people will start following.
So inspirational. So we're going to wrap up. A quick call to action to the soul of MIT community. Elsa, if you want to start.
Never take no as an answer. Being an immigrant and a minority and a woman in technology, no's is all over, everywhere. But I learned that when you never take no for an answer, it's usually not yet, you break down so many doors.
Awesome. Mbwana?
Big problems take time to solve. And so for anyone who's interested in Africa, which people always ask me, hey, how do I get into Africa? You have to spend the time on the ground. There are many African countries that are welcoming now. and understanding how the lay of the land can get you so far. If you're building a great technology in MIT, you're a solver, et cetera, spending time on the ground. Don't just build a drone startup or Hyperloop and think you're going to have it in Africa like that. You have to go in and invest the time and effort to connect with the community.
Wonderful. Thank you again so much. This is super exciting, and thanks everyone for your attention.